Yo, Little Lolo coming back down to Earth here, and on January 22nd, 2025, a Kick user by the name of Henri Yukabian went live on the Kick streaming site at the Antioch High School and streamed a very haunting and disturbing scene that would injure two students and unfortunately take the life of another. Now, the short stream video that surfaced on the internet does not showcase any of the gruesome events that took place. It only shows what seems to be the suspect attempting to open this door several times and becoming verbally agitated when he is unable to do so. He then averts his attention elsewhere and begins to walk with the camera pointing at a person directly in front of him where his or her backpack becomes visible. At this point of the video, we could then see the suspect stop, reach into his backpack, and pull out a weapon, which is where the video cuts off. We could then see from a bystander's perspective, most likely a student attempting to shield and conceal himself behind a cafeteria food warmer, record the remainder of the traumatizing events where eventually 3 gunshots go off. A student is then heard saying he shot himself, referring to the shooter who would also take his own life that day. The shooter, who seemingly committed a homicide-suicide, even though that might have not been his intention, was 17-year-old Josselin Henderson, who shot and murdered 16-year-old Josselin Corea Escalante before taking his own life. Now, the police are currently investigating to see if there was any apparent motive on whether or not he specifically targeted her and the other injured victim, who was fortunately able to escape with just a bullet grazed to the arm. But as of now, there doesn't seem to be any targeted motive in that he chose these two at random. So there's just a lot of bizarre and dark details about this case that I want to dive into, including an apparent manifesto and diary that this disturbed individual wrote, where he would express a lot of his frustration on his worldviews that contained a lot of anti-Semitic, extremist, and far-right ideologies, to the point where he would even hate himself because of his own race. This devastating situation also piqued my curiosity to why certain content creators or influencers aren't really talking about this incident, especially since some of their names were mentioned in the manifesto. But I'll get into that later. For now, let me provide you with some details on what occurred that day on January 22nd at Antioch High School. So, Josselin Henderson was dropped off by his mother at school that day. Now, I don't know if he had went to class or if he was dropped off late, but once lunch started, he immediately headed to the restroom, where police speculated is where he retrieved the weapon before confronting Josselin in the cafeteria. This happened at approximately 11:09 a.m., where the shooter would then proceed to shoot 10 rounds from a 9mm pistol in a 17-second time span. At 11:11 is where the police were contacted to soon find the shooter deceased on the cafeteria floor.
31-6, can you explain that again?
Now, what could have prompted a young teenager to commit such a horrific and shocking incursion on other lives is a question that I feel like we have strayed away from amidst the chaos and disorder of the consistent detrimental pattern of school shootings that we have seen here in America. At this point, it has been rooted into our culture and is one of the few stereotypical qualities that foreign countries know us by.
What is the weirdest thing about the U.S.?
Your politics, or your people.
What about our people?
Just
The lenient gun policies blended together with a young, mentally underdeveloped teenager who is controlled by their sentiments and ego. Regardless of intelligence, you could be smart and yet still be dictated by your emotions, will typically find an outlet for their inner rage that might stem from mental illness, trauma, issues at home, or whatever negative driving factor that will push them to the point to commit violence like this. Now, statistically, not all of these people with anger and trauma will become school shooters, but out of the thousands of kids in an environment where deadly settings like these have become normalized, it is more likely to happen, and has happened, as we could see the number of school shootings recorded since 2018, showcasing that there has been 222 school shootings in which at least one person was killed or injured. We have these teenagers who feel entitled to something, succumbed by their deep hatred and self-loathing, where they eventually obsessively idealize other school shooters or hateful rhetoric that usually guides them down this stagnant stagnated hole where they can't get out of, which seems to be the case for Solomon Henderson, as police have discovered a manifesto of sorts, which included a 288-page diary and a separate 51-page document where he was praising various other mass killers, expressing his neo-Nazi and white supremacist beliefs, his hatred for his own race, and his anti-Semitic remarks. Now, I kind of have to censor a majority of the various pages that surfaced on the internet because of how bad the content within them is, but you can clearly see from the words the amount of hate that controlled the mind of this individual like a virus that could not be contained. Now, you can really tell that he was a very introspective human being who really despised the societal structures that we derive in and the monotonous system that we follow, which seems to be the subject of concern for a lot of these mass shooters. There seems to be an essence of fear and paranoia in his writings that really seep out of his words through the constant deconstruction of his understanding of what the complexities of our reality is here in America. It's uncomfortable to read because it's overflowing with that sentiment throughout this entire manifesto, and what seems to be inspired by another mass shooter in Bratislava, Slovakia. He really seems to be unconsciously trying to emulate this image of a nihilist mass terrorist trying to disrupt the pillars of foundation of the society that we exist in. As one of his pages read,
"For societal structures to function, there must be a set of agreed upon rules, which we call laws, to govern all individuals which comprise them. Without those rules to abide by, individuals would likely work against each other and societies would collapse. Even assuming the goodwill of the individuals comprising a society, having laws allows us to determine the point at which a dysfunctional individual must be stopped by force. Of course, laws are simply words, spoken words or words on paper, but only words. Laws gain power through their enforcement, and enforcement is only possible through violence or the implied threat of violence. As an example, a man may pay off a speeding ticket because he thinks it's the right thing to do, but what stops him from deciding he doesn't feel like paying it is the threat of being forcefully taken to jail. And once in jail, what keeps him behaved is a threat of further confinement, which is achieved through violence. Thus, without violence, laws cannot be enforced. If laws cannot be enforced, the laws means nothing."
And a lot more. Now, a lot of these pages are filled with just bullshit and nonsense, and really highlights how he progressively was getting more mentally deranged as we further get into the manifesto. A lot of these images are just AI generated meme style shit posting that you'll see on an alt-right X account that has like 12 followers. He then proceeds to get into detail of how he needs to get fit before he commits this act of violence, because the mainstream media will only cover your story if you're attractive and appealing. After this, he then answers questions as if he was already dead, concluding that he might have already premeditated suicide, on why he decided to engage in these heinous acts of violence. The entire thing was just really sickening. Now, one of these questions that he asked himself was, is there a particular group or people that radicalized you most? Where he states that Candace Owens, Ethan Ralph, Nick Fuentes, Turkey Tom, Ruben Sim, Mr. Beast, Cops and Talks, Wayne Lamright, iDubbbz, Destiny, and Hassan Piker were all immediate influences to what radicalized him most. Which honestly, Destiny and Hassan being in the same conversation as someone who radicalized you is insane, especially since they try to be as polarizing from each other as possible. Mr. Beast being thrown in there is kind of random. I can only assume it's just this dude being an online Redditor shitposter trying to troll. And another one that actually took me by surprise is Turkey Tom, because although he does have a relationship with Destiny, he doesn't really post alt-right content. It's usually just him speaking on internet drama. So that one was kind of random to me as well. But I mean, Nick Fuentes, iDubbbz, Cops and Talks, all these other individuals, including Candace Owens, which seems to be his biggest inspiration, are all individuals who definitely can cause a person to switch into that alt-right pipeline. And this is interesting to me too, because nobody who was mentioned in the manifesto, as far as I'm concerned, brought any light to this situation at all, which granted, that might be more of a beneficial decision to not do so that you don't discredit your name, and also to avoid bringing any awareness to a horrendous crime like this, which is exactly what the murderer probably wanted. but I would have expected somebody like Destiny or Turkey Tom to probably mention it at least one time in their stream. Regardless, I think I brought too much attention to this traumatizing situation, but I think it's a conversation that needs to be had, because school shootings are something that shouldn't be a common occurrence, to the point where children are encouraged to purchase bulletproof backpacks for their safety. I think the internet can also be a cesspool of negativity, to the point where we can reinforce this inner hatred for these degenerates, where they can now find a Reddit thread or a Discord server that is consumed with others similar to them, where in this particular incident, the shooter was able to meet a likewise entity who was also succumbed to the same malicious ideologies as he was. A woman by the name of Natalie Rupno, who also committed a school shooting in December of last year, where she would then also commit suicide. Solomon Henderson seemed to have been following this young lady on social media and even performed the same hand gestures as she did in a photo, indicating that there might have been some sort of communication between the two. We as a country, although seem to be going down in a regular route since Trump got elected, have desensitized crimes like school shootings and have seemed to just incorporate them in our society, to the point where we no longer have a reaction to incidences like these anymore. And I strongly believe that it is an issue that needs to be addressed to some extent. I don't want to wait until the day where one mentally ill individual just decides to take out a numerous amount of young adults because of a deep-rooted hatred that could have been reduced with some level of assistance. Yeah. Anyways, that's all for me. I'm off to another dimension. See ya.